The Jubilee Debt Campaign has been going on for many years and has had a fair amount of success. Now, the question to ask yourself is, well, why is this important? Why is this an issue of global concern? Developing world countries owe approximately $3.7 trillion and have around $1.5 billion in interest that they have to pay daily. Now, these are the poorest people in society that are burdened with one of the biggest debts in history. And unfortunately, due to some of their leaders, not even the decisions that they've taken, they must then burden this onto their shoulders for generations to come. So the JDC is a fantastic initiative, and we're going to find out a little bit more about them today.
Well, just a quick comment. I mean, of course, debt has existed for a long time. It came in a peculiar form in the late part of the 20th century and at the heart of this campaign. And that was the debt of very poor countries to either very rich countries or to international finance institutions which were largely funded by rich countries. And money had been loaned to these countries irresponsibly. I mean, irresponsible because many of those poor countries hadn't the wherewithal to use the money in a productive way, but also because there was a lot of money washing around in banks, notably from oil revenues. And banks don't like money not being used, so they wanted to push it on with, of course, interest. And one of the lessons that has been rubbed home to us from, of course, the Muslim tradition is that interest, making money out of money, is something you really shouldn't do, and which the Christian tradition of against usury ditched in the late Middle Ages because it didn't work if you wanted to be a capitalist. But so debt took a particular form. And I think when you say, well, what about the future? The issue in one way stays the same, and in another way it shifts a little bit. I mean, it has shifted. For example, we began to learn about what are known as vulture funds. Mm-hmm. You can actually buy debts on the market quite cheaply, but then you go back to the original debtor and you ask for the full amount. So you make money out of debt. And then the tax issue, whereby people say they're investing in countries, but their profits mainly come out of the country. It doesn't benefit the country, and they don't pay their taxes for it. So it's not actually helping that country. It isn't an investment, it's a speculation, or it's an exploitation. So I think one thing is to try and keep up with the kind of changing nuances. And of course, the Jubilee Debt Campaign people, the staff, small staff, but very well informed, they can provide information and keep us up with where this issue has got to. I think another quite different point is this, that the campaign started out saying there's a Jubilee year in 2000, we're going to get these debts cancelled, so it was kind of time limited. We're going to do this by 2000. Well, of course, we did a lot, but we didn't do it all. And then there was a great debate, well, do we go on or do we stop, because we said it was about the Jubilee year. We noticed that many people in the poorer countries had only just found the wherewithal even to begin to campaign. We can start fairly easily if we want to in these countries. In poor countries, it's not easy to find the wherewithal to begin to lobby and campaign on these issues. And they face, we do as well, but they also face, difficult government circumstances. So we had a long argument about this, and in the end we said, we've got to go on. So what I'm saying is, as human beings, it's quite easy to get tired campaigning on issues. People want to go somewhere else and do something else. That's human. Sure. And it's human for older people like me, and it's human for younger people who are coming on. So I think an oldie wants to say partly, not being very virtuous in it, kind of stick at it, Yeah. The world doesn't actually change very fast. It sometimes changes fast because catastrophes overtake everybody, like the present financial crisis. But if you're actually trying to change the way the world works so that trade is fairer and we're not exploiting countries, we're genuinely investing in them, and taxes are paid and all these kinds of things, it doesn't come quickly. So the art of persevering and and supporting one another and saying, come on, you know, we'll stick together and do this. I think those are important virtues. Right at the beginning, a quick word to everyone who's worked hard to organise the day, led by, guess who, Audrey. At the head of my paper, and probably at the head of the programme when it goes up, is Faith in Justice, Dharmic Faiths Conference World Interfaith Harmony Week. I think the word Dharma is not easy to define. That might be one of its virtues. I'm treading very carefully. I'm not very knowledgeable. But I think you might slot it somewhere into that word harmony. I don't think the two things are unrelated. So it's quite appropriate that in this World's Faith and Interfaith Harmony Week, we're looking especially at those faith traditions that have now come together, I think, in the Dharmic Faith Council. Those four that are particularly related to India, the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Jains and the Sikhs. And then this rather interesting for me bridge faith tradition of Zoroastrianism, which, as far as I understand it, is certainly rooted in the Indian subcontinent. But the Abrahamic faiths, and the faiths of the book as we sometimes call ourselves, the Jewish tradition, the Christian and the Islamic traditions, owe quite a lot to Zoroastrianism. And my limited studies know that through Zoroastrianism, through the Jewish and Old Testament traditions, it has also influenced Christian thinking. So we have a bridge faith in a way, and these four very interesting faiths from India. And I think another point to make is that whilst in our work for justice together on an interfaith basis, and especially focus, as far as some of us are concerned, on the debt issue, we have talked quite a lot, of course, between the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims. We have had conversations with the Sikhs, and we had a wonderful occasion some years ago here at the Gurdwara, and I still have the huge photograph of us all up on the roof with our colours and our banners, and of course our headscarves. Some of us look rather stranger than others in them. I thought I looked quite good, actually. But it's a wonderful photographic memory that you produced for us, and it's still on my wall there, and I look back to it with a great deal of pleasure. But I think that though, of course, we have known about and talked somewhat with and know people in these other faiths, that conversation has not perhaps gone as far as it should have done and as it might, and maybe today is an opportunity to take it a bit further. So I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm sure you are, and I look forward to this occasion and hope that we can all deepen our understanding, not least in learning from one another. I know that I have learned from two other faith traditions a great deal. One is Islam, and the other is Buddhism. Not all that I should, but things that have been of great value to me in my own thinking and practice, and I hope to learn more from these other faiths today, as I'm sure you do. So enough of me, and I want to invite Dr. Mohinder Singh, who I really know as Babaji rather than Dr. Mohinder Singh, to come up here and introduce the conference for us today. It's a great pleasure to see you again, and please come up and share your understandings with us. Babaji.
There are certain debts you cannot pay back. They are too vast and infinite. We owe an infinite debt to God, the eternal giver of life, of goodness, of creation. We are indebted to our parents, whose love and sacrifice we can only repay in insignificant ways. To be ungrateful and forgetful of such debts is one of the worst sins. We should consider the effects of debt on the human being. If you are under debt, your body chemistry is impaired, your functioning becomes substandard, your stress level increases, your happiness and serenity gets upset, Likewise, in order to relieve debt, you have to start by opening a space in your heart. You cannot be stone-hearted. You must ignite compassion, benevolence, and altruism. We talk about global poverty. Its roots are in spiritual poverty. Our lack of spiritual values is a major cause. We should also think in terms of global goodness, global morality, global ethics and possibilities of transformation they offer, as well as gross domestic product. What if we also thought in terms of gross domestic spiritual product? The accumulative and mega accumulative effects of virtue can be immense. Individually and collectively, we have to look separately at the human condition in a world where we are programmed to succumb to undesirable and unethical temptations. We need to be reconditioned back to becoming aligned with our innate divine virtues. The human is vulnerable to internal vices which are exploited in an incredible, sophisticated way by media and technology. In Sikh tradition, they are known as the 5 thieves of lust, anger, greed, possessiveness, and arrogance. In both subtle and explicit ways, the social and the media environment glamorizes whatever appeals to these baser instincts. There's a beautiful verse in our Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and is attributed to Kabir, who is a Muslim. In our scripture, we have writings of Muslims and Hindus. And of course, translations are a very poor substitute for the original. If you want to know about Islam, you should know Arabic. If you want to know Hinduism, you must know Sanskrit. And so it goes on. You have to have these classical languages. When you have translations and translations and translations, they distort the meaning. They dilute the meaning. So there is no translation that can equal and compare with the original. But let me try and translate what Kabir is saying in our Guru Granth Sahib Ji. He says, Kabir, where there is knowledge and wisdom, you have religion or dharma. Religion or dharma is not without wisdom and knowledge. It is not an abstract thing. Where there is deceit and there are lies, there is sin. Where there is greed, there is famine, death, and destruction. And the last one, where there is forgiveness, you have God Himself. Thank you.
Now, I hope that was an interesting introduction for you. Certainly helped to give me a bit of context around the JDC and the event here today. Now, faith and Dharmic-based traditions have provided a commitment to the JDC campaign, and we're going to find out a little bit more about these faith-based traditions and their reasoning for why this is such an important issue to tackle.
What causes the suffering of the world is ignorance, attachment, and aversion. That's the motor that drives the difficulties of our lives. And by ultimately overcoming our own ignorance is the thing that cuts through all of this. So it sounds very simple when you put it like that. But if we look at ourselves, our arrogance, our avarice, our greed is resting on our ignorance, because we don't understand that we do damage to ourselves and to others and to the environment if we have unrestrained greed and we feel that this is mine and I will defend myself against anyone who takes it from me or denies something to me. We can very easily see this chain of action and reaction. In the same way, if we allow our antagonism, our aversion to dominate, we allow ourselves to do things to others in the name of our superiority, our arrogance, we can treat others, we can take their land from them, we can dig up their gold and their copper and their diamonds, and it doesn't matter with what happens to people who have been living there for thousands of years. They don't count. What counts is making money for my investors, and we justify ourselves in these ways without seeing the huge damage we do to the environment and to other human beings.
Arya Samaj is totally based on Vedic doctrines, Vedic principles, which is God-given knowledge, and that knowledge is from the beginning of creation, given by God to 4 seers, holy hearts. Those were Agni, Vayu, Aditya and Angira by names. And Arya Samaj, Arya means noble person, who is progressive in knowledge and wisdom, who is a good thinker of society and nations. And Samaj means society. So Arya Samaj was led by Maharshi Dayananda Saraswati in 1875, first in Bombay in India, and now it is spread to whole of the world.
From an Arya Samaj perspective, the word Arya actually means someone who's noble, and someone who's noble, you're talking about someone who has a lot of good virtues in them. We're not talking about people who have vices where you're talking about exploitation of the weak, greed. We're talking about people who should try to elevate themselves, who try to rise above all castes, creed and so on, and help other individuals, which basically leads me to my second point, which is the 9th principle of the Arya Samaj. We brought a few pamphlets and booklets. They're basically on the table right in the left-hand corner. The 9th principle of the Arya Samaj basically is quite clear. An individual should not be content with their own well-being, but should be content in their own well-being, in the welfare of others. So in other words, in the good of others lies our own. If I can bring happiness to somebody else, it's also good for me. It's not just good. I'm not doing it because it's good. I'm doing it because it's a good act. I dedicate my acts to God, basically, because we're all obviously subject to the law of karma. As we sow, so shall we reap. My final point basically comes to a Sanskrit mantra in the Vedas. I don't remember the Sanskrit verse off by heart myself, but I'm not sure if people have obviously visited Arya Samaj based in Nishals themselves, but the English translation is very sublime. It's, I can leave it with you, you can have a think about it yourself. It goes along the lines of earn with 2 hands and distribute with thousands. And it's not necessarily just money, it's your time, your dedication, your own wealth as well. Because I can give £10 to a charity, but if someone else in my own family might not be able to give £10, they might be able to give their own time, go to an orphanage in India, wherever it is in the world. That person, in the eyes of God, would probably be a better human being than I would be.
Isn't it amazing that there is such an overlap between the value set of all of these traditions and their commitment to try to tackle this as a global issue? Now, we wanted to understand from some of the attendees here, well, why is this such an important issue to tackle?
When you talk about transposing it, it's been around for a long, long time, and we've debated this phrase, forgiving debts, and said it's not a good phrase. Incidentally, it sits in a very central prayer in the Christian tradition called the Lord's Prayer, where the Scots say every Sunday, forgive us our debts. But as far as the Jubilee campaign, it's a very old issue. Now, what you've got to... we said that forgiveness is inappropriate as a word, because to forgive somebody something implies that they have done something wrong. Now, in our judgment, although nobody comes out of the debt story with completely clean hands, just to tell the story in terms of, well, there's a poor country in Africa, it's been completely irresponsible and now it won't pay back what it's got, is to misunderstand the story. Sometimes the people who should be forgiven are corrupt governments, whether they're in the south or the north, who take this money and misuse it and in fact put it in their own bank accounts. Secondly, if anybody's to be forgiven because they've done wrong, it's the rich countries and financial institutions which have lent money irresponsibly. They lent money irresponsibly in the hope of making money out of money. So we don't think the language of forgiveness in that setting, implying that the poor countries are the ones who are mainly at fault, is appropriate. That's why we've talked about debt cancellation. But certainly some of the countries and institutions that have set up that situation, they do need to think again about what they're doing, just as, of course, in the present discussions about the bank. The other aspect of the argument which you've mentioned was people used to say, oh, well, if you forgive debts, you know, nobody will take this seriously anymore. And I mean, that has not proved to be true. It also led to a discussion about conditionality, that we will cancel the debt on certain conditions. And the main condition that came out of that was that a poor country, if its debt was to be cancelled, had to work with its population, civic society organisations, to draw up actual policies to use the money to reduce poverty in that country. And that was not to be a plan that was a mysterious plan drawn by governments and banks somewhere else, but a plan drawn up by governments and their people, so that everybody knew what the commitments were and what should happen and could monitor that and check up that it was actually happening. And I've done some work on that, for example, in Nigeria and Tanzania, trying to follow through how far those poverty reduction strategies, that's what they were called, how do you use the money once you've got debt cancellation, have been followed through. And we know that, again, nothing's perfect. But in some countries, for example, Uganda, because of debt cancellation, many more children have had schooling than they would otherwise have done. You know, free schooling, the money has been used to help to reduce poverty.
So the Sikh Dharma, just for those of you who might need a little introduction, it was founded by 10 consecutive human gurus who we see. There are teachers, their whole life example provided practical role models for us. And the teachings that we revere as revealed, a revealed message from the divine, is enshrined in the Guru Granth Sahib, the sacred scripture. So it's when you visit a Gurudwara, as we have next door, you're visiting the residence, if you like, the abode of the Guru. And the word Gurudwara itself is you're crossing the threshold, the gateway to meet the Guru. And we've already heard that Sikh means learner. And that's a concept that I think keeps our humility as well. The Khalsa, for those of you have learned a little about this Sikh faith, the word Khalsa is for that community of initiated practitioners who've committed to a way of life. And most of the world knows the Khalsa for its identity, the 5 kakar, the wearing of the turban or the dastar. And as soon as you start to look at Sikh tradition really conceptually in terms of values, you start to really be able to see that identity from the inside out rather than just from the outside in. They're not simply kind of badges of identity, but the turban, for example, signifies wise rulership, ruling your own mind wisely, ruling the world around, good governance, if you like. And of course, in many world cultures, it's associated with wisdom and saintliness and also learning. And this path of Sikhi, the Sikh faith, you're always shuttling between being reflective, listening to teachings, either directly through the Guru Granth Sahib or through the mouths of those who practice the teachings themselves, and then also doing Sangat, that very practical learning alongside others. And these are two very important component parts. Basic tenets. I think for all traditions there's a long, long list of values and qualities of the ideal human being. Just to recap, the threefold motto that underpins Sikh tradition: Naam japo, kirat karo, vand ke shako. These words, japo, karo, shako, they're all imperatives, they're all doing words. So it's a calling to remember God, to work in a spirit of remembering Kartar, the Creator, and having that positive work ethic. And also this idea of self-reliance. If each one of us on the chain also has this spirit of standing on our feet, doing the best we can, that actually helps to strengthen the whole chain. And then share. Being generous, and also this word from this morning, this spirit of interdependence. I also reiterated the importance of reflecting on the teachings, and in Sikh tradition, the scripture is a very lyrical one. So Kirtan is a tradition, a long, long tradition in India, and Sikhs will often talk about the importance of doing Kirtan, either listening or singing it daily. And there is something about the impact of music on the heart and mind. It's not just a scholarly analysis and just a philosophy or a theology. There's something about the power of music to change you, and it's really harnessing that as a part of your daily learning. And this is a motto which is actually now used, you'll see on the blazers of the children across the road at the school. It says Mannima Mat Uchi on the crest. And Mannima is about being humble, so this kind of lowering, being lowly, modest. And Mat Uchi is being wise, being visionary. And so you have this combination of both. And Bhai Sahib has described it very beautifully for the children. Reach for the stars and the moon, yet be as humble as the dust.
In Jainism, we believe in respect of all life. The importance of all life and its uniformity is described in the Sutra Kritang Sutra. I'll quote, "All forms of life feel pleasure and pain, nor should it be ill-treated, slain, abused, tormented, or driven away. Respect of life includes its life, happiness, and freedom. Killing, pain, injury, compulsion, abusing all others are models of violence and violate the respect to all living beings of all orders, from microscopic to the human. Today, we are talking about human thought and behavioral repercussions on humans. Thus, here I bring attention to the Jain principle of ahimsa, which is nonviolence. We live by it. It has a characteristic and unique comprehensiveness, since it prohibits the use of force in any manner against any form of life. Secondly, the added pressures to repay loans also creates environmental havoc. The lands, forests, and waters are cultivated exhaustively, leaving irreparable damages, over-industrialization, which causes pollution, greenhouse effects. So what do? These actions break the ahimsa Jain law and vow, when what we take from nature more than what we need. The huge debts also create the more ubiquitous phenomena of poverty. In an effort to repay its loans, nations are unable to invest in their own communities, societies in areas of health, education, and so on. It's not just the debts which attribute to this poverty, but also the developed nations' attitude to consumption, which can be held responsible for the inequality in wealth and throughout the world. The cancellation of global debts would be a first of many steps to allow the communities and nations to stand on their own feet and be self-sufficient. Only such a state of mind, free from worries of making a living, to support its basic needs, could think of spiritual upliftment.
I think one of the key messages that's come out of today is that whilst there is global debt, it is a global issue. We have to take individual responsibility. Individually, we can all contribute. Everybody at the conference today, at the workshops today, has gone away and said, I'm going to write to Vid's Cable and demand to know what is the state of play with regards to debt. Somebody's just declared their hand in there as I've just walked out that they're going to write to Mr. Cameron and say, come on, from a Buddhist point of view, this is what is good ethical business. How are we doing it? At the turn of the century, somebody said that this was going to be a century of faith. I think we're beginning to see that. I had a conversation with my chairman, Bhai, yesterday in preparation for today, and briefly they touched upon GDP. They said, we have, Singh, gross domestic product. They said we should start having a gross domestic spiritual product. So how are we measuring spiritual content? There's a discussion earlier on in the conference around faiths have been trying to chip away at global debt for so long but have achieved nothing. I beg to differ. I think what the faiths need to do is do what they set out to do, which is the 3 Ps, as Bhai articulated for us this morning, which is pray, practice, and then preach, rather than preach about what your faith is saying, but know nothing about it. So I think we've got to start putting into action our spirituality, our faith, our dharma has got to be used in a more proactive way, rather than just as rhetoric, but carry on in a secular way.
Back in '98, we had the human chain around Birmingham when the G8 leaders were here. And that did change Bill Clinton's mind, Tony Blair's mind, and the other faith and the other leaders who were in Birmingham that time. And we, in '99, we actually got some debt cancelled, and we've gone on chipping away at the debt mountain, and we have actually achieved quite a lot. But I'm not saying that it's not there, and of course now you can't pick up a newspaper here in 2012 and the 4-letter word debt is on every page, and it's come back, and now the rich countries of the world are also in debt, and they're realising that it's based on an evil. I can only use another 4-letter word, but debt is really evil, and it causes such hardship in this country. Poverty is, although we're the 4th richest country, it's causing tremendous damage to our society. And there's a moral argument here, and the faiths have got to take it on board.
Well, this issue is very important because these events are important to have because it increases the awareness of pain and suffering of the less deprived people whose voices are not being heard. Here we meet, we share the traditions of each other's faith or dharma, and see how we can put those values together to alleviate the suffering of others.
Why am I interested in Jubilee Debt Campaign? Because Audrey Miller had this brainstorm and said, we need to do something about this. And she's a wonderful example of one person saying, this we have to pay attention to. And it was soon after that that we had the huge demonstration here in Birmingham where we joined hands all around the city. And it was different estimates between 65,000 and 80,000 people on the street in Birmingham who came from all over the country to join hands to protest to the G8 summit to say about unrepayable debt. So that's the origin of the Jubilee Debt Campaign.
Come and join these groups just come in and listen. Guru Sahib कहते हैं कि सुनना बहुत उत्तम है, कहते पवित्र सुनते पुनीत. सुनने दे विच ज़्यादा असर है. Is a godliness in listening, and I think we should have or make a habit of listening very intently. I normally say, don't look at people from outwardly. Don't look at them. Look inside them. If you read something, you read it, but you read in between the lines. So similarly, life must be a challenge, and we should look what the purpose is.
Poor country debt is probably around $3 to $4 trillion, which sounds an awful lot, but it pales into insignificance compared to the amount that the banks have been bailed out by in the last 2 or 3 years.
We're all concerned about the terrible financial mess that the world is in and the way that it's affecting people in poorer countries even more severely than it is affecting us here. So get in touch with your MP. We are in a democratic country, and make your views heard.
Whilst we sort of deal with the symptoms, the causes, as per this event, is a bigger concept in itself. And it's very important, because until you deal with the causes, we will forever carry on dealing with the symptoms. And in terms of sort of going forward, there's 2 aspects to this event that I will take away with me. One is the spiritual aspect, that you've got to correct yourself in order to bring about change within others. And also, from a secular perspective, you need to change the current financial system.
I think with me it's very important to start with myself as an individual and educate myself about the whole issue, and then to educate my family. And then the hope is together we educate society, influence society to behaving differently, and that includes our MPs. And then the hope is that we can influence the nation as a whole.
Why I'm concerned is that you get some poor countries that get so mired in debt that they just can't get out of it, and it needs to be cancelled. And back in 97, when we were thinking of the millennium, which was 2,000 years after Jesus, one of the things that Jesus was concerned about is that people should have a new start and not be defined by money. And so this was a good way of celebrating the millennium, and things were done, and many poor countries have had debts removed, which has meant that more people can go to school and have proper medical care and so on. What the challenge is now, I think, is, of course, we're in a big international situation now. Some of the same lessons need to apply. We need to think, what is the purpose of the whole economic system? And if you look back into history, debt's been around for 5,000 years. It's not new, and there have been different ways of dealing with it in the past, and religions have had their own part in this, usually a good part, sometimes a bad part. But there are all sorts of things that we can do to explore, from debt cancellation to what I'm particularly interested in, which is better conditions for lending, so that you have there's nothing wrong with debt if it's honest debt, fair debt, so that people can do productive things and make the world better for themselves and others.
I think it's very important, and there's been a lot of things have been said, personal level, but then you light one candle, then with one candle you light many more. So I think from personal level you can make other people aware of the situation and do something about it.
Your Rulings is a unique concept, and it's more than just a TV show. We're aimed at trying to provide you a social media platform that can capture your thoughts, that can capture your opinions and your voice. We've set the wheels in motion. Please get involved by visiting www.yourrulings.com and carry on the discussion.